Ada for not giving my relatives free legal services as a lawyer because they've always treated me as the black sheep. I grew up in a small, lackluster town in the sweltering embrace of Florida. The kind of place where time felt stagnant, and ambitions rarely stretched beyond the horizon of daily routine. My family was deeply rooted in this environment, embodying a collective mindset centered on living for the moment. College wasn't just an uncharted territory for us, it was an alien concept. Life revolved around immediate pleasures and casual camaraderie. Everyone in my family seemed to embrace this ethos wholeheartedly, embodying a lively, outgoing spirit. My parents were fervent participants in Mardi Gras crews, reveling in the vibrant festivities and carefree celebrations. My siblings, equally spirited, threw themselves into sports with infectious enthusiasm. As a unit, they were the embodiment of fun, a tightly knit group that seemed to thrive on shared energy and collective joy. But from as early as I can remember, I felt like an anomaly in the fabric of our family. My interests and inclinations marked me as different, a curious outlier amidst the lively chaos that defined my home. While others basked in the sunlight of social gatherings or chased after balls on the field, I found solace in the quiet companionship of books. I immersed myself in stories and the pursuit of knowledge, pouring my energy into academics with a dedication that puzzled those around me. The idea of spending hours outdoors, sweating under the relentless Florida sun, was anathema to me. I loathed the heat and detested the constant press of humidity that seemed to cling to every inch of my being. Chess became a refuge, a game of strategy and intellect that offered a world far removed from the impulsive antics of my peers. The debate team, too, provided a haven where my voice could find purpose and clarity, a stark contrast to the cacophony of casual banter that dominated my family's conversations. Yet, my pursuits, far from earning admiration or support, were met with bemusement or outright derision. My family, ever spirited and gregarious, couldn't quite fathom the appeal of my solitary interests. They poked fun, often good-naturedly, though the sting lingered. Their disinterest in my passions was more than a matter of preference, it was a glaring chasm of understanding. My parents, who would enthusiastically cheer at my siblings' sports games, seemed perpetually absent from my debates or chess tournaments. Their absence wasn't malicious, but it was telling. Their world didn't have room for quiet intellect or measured deliberation. The same was true for my cousins in extended family, who mirrored this dynamic, reinforcing the sense that I was, in many ways, a stranger among my own kin. As the years passed, this rift deepened, though I learned to navigate it with a quiet resilience. My focus remained steadfastly on my education, a beacon guiding me toward a life that felt worlds away from the confines of my childhood town. The vibrant, celebratory world of my family was one I could never fully inhabit, but it was one I observed with a mix of longing and detachment. Their joys and triumphs were real, but they were not my own. It was a realization that shaped the path I would eventually take, one that led me further from the life they knew and deeper into the one I was determined to build for myself. As I grew older, the distance between myself and my family widened like a canyon carved over time. It wasn't a sudden severing of ties but a gradual drifting apart, each of us pulled in different directions by our own lives and priorities. For me, my focus was unwaveringly on my education and the career I envisioned for myself, a life far removed from the unambitious rhythm of my hometown. My resolve carried me through countless hours of study and determination, all aimed at building a future where I could stand independent and unshackled by the limitations I felt growing up. Eventually, my efforts bore fruit. I achieved a level of success that felt both hard-earned and deeply personal. Today, I am happily married to a man who shares my values and ambitions, a judge in the neighboring county. Together, we have built a life grounded in mutual respect and understanding. My career as a family law attorney, though challenging, has become a source of immense pride and fulfillment. I established my own practice, a milestone that symbolizes not just professional success but also the culmination of years spent defying the odds and expectations of my upbringing. But as fulfilling as my life has become, my connection to my family has dwindled into a tenuous thread of sporadic interactions. Our conversations, when they happen, are rarely casual or heartfelt. They've grown transactional, a series of calls and messages that seem to come only when someone needs something. A legal question here, a favor there, each request a reminder that my role in their lives has been reduced to a resource, rather than a relationship. The warmth and camaraderie they share among themselves remain inaccessible to me, a constant reminder of how far I've drifted from the family dynamic. Over the years, I've grown accustomed to brushing off these requests. The reasons vary: time constraints, ethical concerns, or simply the knowledge that these overtures are fleeting and selfing. I've told myself time and again that I owe them nothing beyond what I'm willing to give, especially when the effort is rarely reciprocated. Each interaction leaves me more resolute in my decision to prioritize the life I've built over the tenuous ties to a past I've worked so hard to move beyond. Recently, however, a situation arose that brought these dynamics into sharper focus. My sister, one of the siblings who used to scoff at my academic pursuits and intellectual inclinations, found herself in a dire predicament. She had lost custody of her children to her ex-husband, a development that sent shockwaves through the family. From what little I know, her lawyer had been ill-equipped to handle the case, and her past a messy tapestry of questionable decisions had been laid bare in court. The result was a custody arrangement that allowed her only every other weekend with her children, a stark departure from the life she had known. When she called me, her voice was heavy with desperation. She begged for my help, asking me to represent her in court to fight for her children. It wasn't just a request for legal aid, it was a plea for me to intervene in a deeply personal crisis. Yet, as I listened to her words, I couldn't help but feel a wave of detachment. The years of estrangement and one-sided interactions had left their mark, and I found myself questioning the sincerity of her appeal. Did she truly see me as a sister, or was I merely a means to an end? My sister's call was laced with urgency, her voice trembling as she laid out the details of her predicament. She begged me to represent her in court, to use my skills and expertise to help her regain custody of her children. But her plea felt hollow to me, a fragile thread of familial connection stretched thin over years of indifference. I listened to her words, yet I could not find it in myself to muster the compassion she seemed to expect. I was honest, perhaps brutally so. I told her that I didn't know her kids, and to be frank, I didn't really care whether she had custody of them or not. It wasn't my battle, and it wasn't my responsibility to clean up the consequences of her life choices. I reminded her of the glaring absence of our relationship over the years. She hadn't called me just to catch up, hadn't reached out to ask how I was doing or to celebrate my achievements. Instead, now that she was in a desperate situation, she suddenly remembered she had a sister who was an attorney. The audacity of it struck me, and I told her plainly that I wouldn't be doing her this massive favor, least of all for free. My work wasn't just my livelihood, it was the culmination of years of sacrifice and effort. I had bills to pay, a team to support, and a reputation to uphold. Offering my services for nothing, especially to someone who had shown me little more than neglect, wasn't something I could justify. She didn't take my refusal well. Her voice cracked as she accused me of turning my back on family, of being heartless in her time of need. I stood firm, knowing that her anger came from a place of desperation, but it didn't make her words sting any less. After all, family, as they had defined it, had never included the kind of mutual respect and support that she now expected of me. The fallout from our conversation didn't end there. My mother, ever the mediator and enforcer of family loyalty, called me not long after. Her tone was a mix of disappointment and reproach, the weight of her disapproval heavy in every word. She shamed me for refusing to help my sister, reminding me of the importance of family and the bonds we were supposed to share. She extended her criticism beyond this incident, bringing up the times I had declined to assist other relatives who had reached out for legal advice or help. In her eyes, I was the ungrateful one, the black sheep who had chosen personal ambition over family loyalty. But I couldn't let her accusations go unchallenged. I asked her a simple question: when was the last time any of them had called me just to check in? When had anyone made an effort to be a part of my life without expecting something in return? I pointed out the imbalance, the pattern of one-sided relationships that had defined my interactions with them for years. My cousin, for instance, was a landscaper. Had he ever offered to do yard work for me in exchange for legal services? No. And now my sister, like so many before her, expected free help without so much as a thought of how it would impact me or the effort I had put into my career. I made it clear that my refusal wasn't just about money, it was about principle. I wasn't a resource to be tapped whenever it was convenient for them. My time and expertise were valuable, and I refused to let myself be taken for granted any longer. My mother, of course, didn't take kindly to my reasoning. She hung up on me, her silence a final, unspoken judgment of my character. But I didn't feel guilt or regret. Instead, I felt a sense of clarity, a reaffirmation of the boundaries I had set for myself. Family, to me, was supposed to be a two-way street. It wasn't enough to share blood or a last name. There had to be effort, care, and mutual respect. Without those things, the bond was little more than an empty label. As much as it hurt to confront this reality, I knew that standing my ground was the right thing to do for my own well-being and for the life I had worked so hard to build. As I sat in the quiet aftermath of my mother's call, the echoes of her disappointment lingered, though they failed to sway my conviction. The truth was, I had spent too many years feeling like the outlier in a family that had never truly seen me. Their idea of family had always been conditional, dependent on convenience and superficial bonds, never on genuine connection. And now, as they reached out to me only in their moments of need, I saw no reason to compromise the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. My mind wandered back to the countless times I had felt like an outsider growing up. The games I had watched from the sidelines, the debates they never attended, the books I had to escape into because no one wanted to share in my world. My accomplishments had been dismissed or overshadowed, yet now they loomed large in their eyes, only because they saw my success as something they could leverage. It was a pattern I could no longer ignore, much less enable. The weight of their expectations, their anger, and their accusations was heavy, but it wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same unspoken demand to conform, to prioritize the family's needs over my own, that had followed me my entire life. Yet, for the first time, I felt no obligation to shoulder it. I had built a life I was proud of, with people who valued and supported me. My husband, my colleagues, my friends, they were my chosen family, a network forged not by blood but by mutual respect and understanding. They celebrated my victories and stood by me during my struggles. That was what family was supposed to feel like, not this endless cycle of guilt and resentment. I replayed the conversation with my mother in my mind, dissecting her words in my own. The examples I had given her weren't meant to be petty, they were a reflection of the deeper issue at play. My cousin could have offered yard work in exchange for legal services. My sister could have proposed a payment plan or even expressed genuine gratitude for the possibility of my help. But they didn't. Instead, they assumed I would give freely, as though my years of education, effort, and sacrifice were insignificant, a resource they were entitled to by virtue of being related to me. And when I pointed this out, when I defended the value of my time and the boundaries I had set, they turned to shame and silence. My mother hanging up on me felt symbolic of the larger disconnect, a refusal to acknowledge my perspective, let alone respect it. But for once, I didn't feel the need to chase after her or seek her approval. I had spoken my truth, and I was at peace with it. In the days that followed, I heard murmurs through the grapevine, relatives talking about my selfishness and how I had forgotten where I came from. The irony wasn't lost on me. If anything, I remembered exactly where I came from, which was why I had worked so hard to create a different life. Their words didn't sting as much as they once might have. Instead, they reaffirmed my decision to distance myself, to prioritize the relationships and values that truly mattered to me. In quiet moments, I did wonder if there was a way to bridge the gap, to find some semblance of harmony with the family I had grown apart from. But the reality was, Bridges require effort from both sides. Until they were willing to meet me halfway, to see me as more than just a convenient solution to their problems, I couldn't see a path forward. So, was I the asshole? Perhaps in their eyes, I was. But in mine, I was someone who had finally learned to value herself, her time, and her hard-earned peace. If that made me the villain of their story, so be it. I had spent too long being the hero of everyone else's narrative, and it was time to write my own.